Hello, friends and adventurers. Our podcast has been supported for months now by Misty Mountain Gaming, and they're now rewarding you, our listeners, with savings on all their fine D&D products such as metal dice, stone dice, glass dice, miniatures, adventures, dice trays, and more. You can use the code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, to save 10% on all purchases made in their online store at mistymountaingaming.com. Every code redeemed helps support Steven and I, and encourages us to make more and better content for you. So be sure to use code TWINS10 whenever you're buying premium Dungeons & Dragons dice and gear from our good friends at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show. Welcome back, friends and adventurers, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration, a topical Dungeons & Dragons podcast hosted by me, the D&D wannabe, and my brother, Steven.
Yep, that's me, the aforementioned brother. Thank you so much for tuning in again. We are excited to have you. We have a lot to discuss today. But before we do that, Rob, how you doing this week?
I've been sick. I caught COVID the week before the recording. And Alabama pollen has shown up in force this past week, and it has, it seems like it's getting worse every year, or maybe I'm just handling it worse every year, but this is probably the worst I've felt in years. So I went to the Dollar General, I bought them out of some cold and flu medication and some antihistamines, and I'm doing okay now. I'm feeling up for the recording. But if my voice sounds just a little bit lower and has a little bit of that growl to it, it's all phlegm. So you're welcome for that.
You know, when I start feeling sick, the last thing that I think is, hey, this is the night that I should record a podcast.
Yeah. So how about you, man? How you doing?
Not too bad. Basketball season is over. The Upward games are done. Our team was only defeated twice overall, so that's the second best track record out of the 4 teams in our age group. And because I've been working with kids and trying to teach them how to play basketball so much over the last couple of weeks, I jumped at the opportunity today to try to play some basketball myself. There was a pickup game going on in the next town over that one of our childhood friends invited us to, so we went over and embarrassed ourselves to varying degrees.
The thing that impressed me, because we just got back from there, both of us, was that I was tapped out after 20 minutes of trying to keep up with these. Frankly, I was tapped out after 2 minutes, but I played for 20. And then I gave up and took my sick butt home. And Steve stuck it out for an extra hour and a half after I left.
Well, that makes it sound like I was playing basketball for an hour and a half. I was probably playing basketball for about 20 minutes, and I was recovering from those 20 minutes for an hour and 10.
I've only just gotten the air back in my lungs from being kicked out of me there. The people we were playing against, I mean, I don't feel old most days until I get around young people, like, 20s or younger.
Yeah.
And then I realize, oh no, my body doesn't do those things.
Yeah, I think we were probably easily in the top 5 oldest guys there. Like, I don't even think that either of us was guy number 5.
I think we were probably the oldest ones. We were so uncool.
I was the cool form of uncool before uncool became a thing.
Is that an Epic Rap Battles of History reference?
It is Nerd vs. Geek by
Oh,
Rhett
there
and
we
Link.
go. There we go. Rhett and Link. Good mythical morning, guys. Now there's a better podcast that you should be listening to. Anyway, from things that we are bad at to things that we are good at and things that we are excited about to more things that we are excited about, there has been another One D&D Unearthed Arcana drop. This time for the Druid and the Paladin.
Paladins! I'm so excited! I've been waiting for Paladins, Sorcerers, and Warlocks this whole time, and finally we are touching on what is arguably my favorite class in the game.
It's really unfair that my two favorite classes got knocked out in the first UA, and now we're we're just slowly waiting for Steve's favorites to come creeping in so that we can actually playtest some of this stuff.
And they've already announced that the fighter classes are what are they? They don't call them the fighter classes.
The
warrior classes are coming up next. So that means that all the other spellcasters are going to have to wait till last.
Which is fun because the only one that I'm really waiting on now, like I really want to see what they do with the fighter, because that's going to set the tone for kind of where I'm judging everything else, because the fighter is the standard to me. Everything needs to compare to the fighter, and I don't have that benchmark yet.
Well, covering the fighter without covering weapons is borderline useless, and it does sound like that Wizards of the Coast acknowledges this, so whenever they release the next playtest material, we will be hearing about the different simple and martial weapons, and they've teased that they're going to be differentiating them more, which is exciting. That said, they also happen to mention that they're going to be slowing down their release schedule. So, yeah, we're just going to have to milk this one for all it's worth, both as content creators and as players of the game.
Nevertheless, we've been waiting on this one for a while, so let's not waste any time getting into it. As usual, if you want to follow along as we go through the content, we will have a link in the description of this episode wherever you find this episode so that you can get to that playtest PDF. And we are going to start with the Druid. Steve, what's your experience with Druids in 5e?
I have sometimes played alongside them and DM'd for them.
I mean, that's good.
Honestly, out of all the classes that exist in the game, Druid was the one that excited me the least, and that I was probably the least likely to ever play. Now, of course, I'm saying that from a thematic standpoint. Like, there's nothing that really appeals to me about the Druid from a aesthetic standpoint or a conceptual standpoint. And I do have to admit that Druids are a very strong class in 5th edition, but that said, the things that make them strong don't really appeal to me mechanically. So in preparing for this episode, I have taken my longest and most intentional look at the 5th edition Druid yet. How about you, Rob? I know you've played at least one Druid because he popped up in my Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign.
Right, I've played two, and as you said, the Druid is a mechanically strong class in 5th edition, and I don't typically like playing things that I think are mechanically strong.
Yeah, that's why you like monks.
I never want to be accused of power gaming or of taking the easy way. I would rather take something that is weak and make it useful and make it powerful. So I typically have avoided Druids because I kind of get the sense that Druids are the class that the whole party could just get nuked, and walking out of the mushroom cloud, the Druid could come out basically unscathed, smoking a cigarette that it lit off the charred corpses of its allies. Like, it is a strong class.
It is.
Very much so compared to the other options. So I haven't played with it too much myself, but I have run for a lot of them, and I've done a lot of work in learning them, kind of because I was trying to validate to myself why they could stand with the other classes and were not just this sin in the player's handbook of this completely overpowered class. But the One D&D content seems to be addressing how strong Druids are in 5e, and maybe taking a look at balancing them out while giving you some opportunities that the 5e Druid lacked.
Yeah, I think before we start going level by level, we should kind of talk about Druids conceptually, right? If not from a narrative perspective, then at least from a design perspective, right? 5th edition Druids, they may not have been the strongest class overall, but I definitely think that they were the strongest class in a vacuum, right? Wild Shape alone was the reason that they were potentially the best and most broken class in the game. I mean, you know, we know that I'm a paladin guy, but it is what it is. Multiple types of encounters, ranging from combat to exploration, and even a couple of different kinds of social encounters, can be absolutely trivialized by the Druid's Wild Shape feature as it exists in 5th edition. And anything that Wild Shape couldn't cover, being a prepared spellcasting full caster, usually filled in those gaps.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get a Druid out of its comfort zone. You're rarely going to be in a situation where the Druid thinks, I can't contribute here.
Right. As a matter of fact, there's rarely situations where the Druid isn't the answer to the problem, right? Whether you need a tank for the party, whether you need a support for the party, whether you need someone to go in there and deal some damage, whether you need an infiltrator. I mean, about the only thing that they couldn't do was talk and be persuasive, but hey, they even had Charm Person on their spell list. So, there was almost no situation that they didn't have an answer for. And if I was to be told that I was going to be the recipient of a solo campaign and for some reason was very invested in being able to succeed at everything that I attempted, I would probably have to play a Druid.
And you said you weren't necessarily going so far as to say that the Druid was the best class, and by that I mean the most powerful class in the game. I will go there. I think they are so powerful to the point of being overpowered, and I think I alluded to this earlier, that certainly in my younger days as a dungeon master, I had trouble coming up with ways to challenge them that weren't going to just decimate the rest of the party or put them in way too dangerous of a situation.
Yeah, and a game that is based on team play and cooperation, the fact that the class exists that could basically be a one-man show definitely needs some rebalancing. And it looks like One D&D is taking the opportunity to do that. But they're not just coming out to nerf the Druid. They're also trying to address a couple of underlying issues with the way that it was implemented in 5th edition. In an interview with Kenrick and Crawford, they mentioned that according to the characters made on D&D Beyond, which is a pretty good test group for all the characters being made in D&D in general, Druids are by far the least popular class to be made. And they attribute this, probably accurately, to how complex playing a Druid is, thanks to their core feature being wild shape. It's a big ask to ask a player who's trying to learn the game, not just to learn the rules, not just to learn their character class, not just to learn being a full prepared caster, but then to learn the stat block of every beast that is 1/4 CR or lower, because that's what you can turn into as a level 1 Druid. That's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, most players can finish a whole campaign going 1 to 20 without ever having to look at a monster stat block. So there is definitely a learning curve that exists in playing a Druid that is just far and above more demanding than any other class in 5th edition.
But that is all the 5th edition Druid. So with kind of that base, let's look at how the One D&D Druid compares.
Before we start talking about the signature class features, as always, we get to talk about their starting proficiencies. And most of these are going to be very similar and familiar to what you would enjoy in 5th edition. However, there is one major and noteworthy change. This comes in the form of their armor training. Druids, historically, have been excluded, forbidden, from wearing metal armor. They can only wear armor that is made out of things that you would find in nature, which is weird because, metal is found in nature, but whatever. I never really got this from a conceptual standpoint. I figured, hey, if you're a protector of the forest, maybe you don't wear something that's made out of animal hide. But
yeah,
I guess neither here nor there. That's just the way it's been for a long time. They are finally addressing that here in the One D&D Playtest material. They have removed the restriction that prevents Druids from wearing metal armor. But instead, they have given us a little bit of a trade-off, which gives us a unique situation here with their armor training, because they are the only class that Rob or I can think of that has ever been given light armor proficiency and shield proficiency without getting medium armor proficiency. This is the compromise that we've made moving into 1D&D.
Right, and medium armor was something that 5e Druids had access to. Not all medium armor, but medium armor training in general. And we have always seen medium armor and shields going together. They were synonymous throughout 5th edition and up to this point in 1D&D. That has never necessarily made sense to me. I feel like light armor and shields is definitely a thing that can and should be out there. The fact that it is here on the Druid is, I guess it's not that weird, but it was frankly more exciting than anything when I saw it here. But the moving away from the medium armor for the Druid is indicative of what we will see later on in the class, that the Druid is moving away from being the party's tank. And a lower armor class is going to reflect that. If you're going to want the higher armor class for the Druid, you're either going to have to take the feats to be able to get into that superior armor, or you're going to be finding ways to compensate with spells.
But I like that is an option because in 5th edition and probably before, Druids had no incentive to take those armor training proficiency gaining feats, right? So now, if you want your Druid to be better at those sorts of things, you have more options because the ceiling is now higher. You know, the best armor, I believe, that a Druid in 5th edition could ever hope to don would be hide armor. But now, if you take the right options, you can get yourself a Druid in plate armor. And I'm definitely glad that they separated shields from normal medium armor proficiency because to take away both medium armor and access to shields would just drive a Druid's AC into the ground.
And put it down here with the rest of us common folk.
With the peasants.
Outside of their missing medium armor proficiency, Druids are looking pretty similar as they take their first level. D8 hit dice, intelligence and wisdom saving throws, the opportunity to take the same skill proficiencies, and they still get training with an herbalism kit. All the same weapons that they are used to, minus scimitars. But apparently there's going to be a reason for that. As Steve mentioned, we were talking about the fighter, they're going to be redefining how some of these weapons work, and apparently scimitars are going to fill a new role that doesn't fit Wizards of the Coast vision for the Druid.
And with that, we begin digging into the iconic Druidic features, the ones that are wholly unique to the Druid class. Skipping ahead to the simplest of the ones that you gain at first level, we have Druidic. Druidic being the language, the secret language of the Druids.
Oh, that's why they named it that.
You can now speak that language, and you can use it to leave hidden messages for people, kind of a la thieves can't. Because apparently, even though thieves can't, Druids can.
But
yeah, there's a better joke in there, but I didn't find it. All right. So Druidic is interesting. It's unique in that these languages that have been left behind can be found by other players. They have to make a check in order to even notice that it exists, but even if they notice it, they still have no idea what it means. Granted, this can be overcome with magic like comprehend languages, but outside of some sort of magical ability, it'll all be Greek to them.
Druidic here works the same as it did in 5th edition, with one just kind of odd change. In the paragraph after Druidic, it specifies in both editions what it requires for a non-Druid to be able to detect these messages. And from 5th edition's perception, One D&D has changed that to an intelligence skill, an investigation check, which, do you feel that's more appropriate or less, or just kind of different? I know you're less likely as a character to have proficiency in investigation. So many races get a hand for perception just out the gate.
Yeah, I think that investigation isn't utilized enough. I feel like in the games that I've been in the past, that a lot of times perception is asked for when I think investigation would have been more appropriate, because perception is about hearing something or seeing something, but it's not about looking for something. It's not about noticing something. You know, like investigation should be anything that Sherlock Holmes would notice that a normal person wouldn't. It's not Legolas's ability to see something that is far away or to hear something that other people didn't notice. It is discerning meaning from what you see or knowing what to look for.
I just had an image of some grass stalks like snapped at different heights and bent in particular directions, and that has special meaning to a Druid, but to other people it's just someone walked through here.
Yeah, I noticed they don't specify how these messages are left or what form they take.
I've genuinely never thought about it outside of like a normally like thieves canty kind of context. This is a nice little mental rabbit hole to go down.
I feel like a couple of examples would have been cool there. Like, you know, how when you're doing like any sort of outdoors training, they talk about how 3 of something is a signal, you know? Like if you see like 3 rocks stacked on top of one another, I do not remember what they signify, so that's got to be Druidic.
I remember leaves of 3, let it be. Is that a thing?
I mean, that's a thing. I don't think it's any form of communication. Let's see, hold on. Okay, so I looked it up, and stacking something like 3 rocks stacked together is called a cairn, and it is commonly used to denote that you are on the right track. Like if you are traveling through the woods and there's not a trail, you can follow things stacked on top of one another, and that will signify that you're going the right way. It's kind of like in Balto, where the bark was scratched off the trees, and, the dogs were signaling to each other which way they needed to go, or the wolves, I guess. So when I think of Druidic, that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking of.
That's got to be something that I put a little more thought into in the future, probably the near future. Either way, Druids already know all about it. We also, as usual, get access to spellcasting for the Druids as early as first level. Now, some changes have been made to how the Druids access and prepare their spells, much like the Cleric. And did we talk about this for the Cleric? If we did, I'm not sure that we emphasized it enough. How the number of spells that you prepare each day and what levels they are different from 5th edition.
Yeah, I believe we talked about it when we were going through the Ranger or the Bard. The way that all of these casters that we've covered so far have been set up is that they are now prepared spellcasters who get to select a certain number of spells for each level from their requisite spell list. Of course, the Druid is going to be selecting from the primal spell list just like the Ranger did. The way that it is different from 5th edition is that the number of spells that you can prepare is not determined by a formula, it's determined by a table. And that table specifies that you have to prepare a certain number of spells of each level to which you have access. For instance, let's take a look at a 5th level Druid, just for the sake of argument. They will have access to a total of 9 prepared spells that they can set up for their day. But 4 of those spells must be of 1st level, 3 of those spells must be of 2nd level, and 2 of those spells must be of 3rd.
And it mirrors how many spell slots you have. It's the same table, and I like the simplicity of this, even if it can seem a little limiting to people who are coming over from 5e. For people who are getting their start with One D&D, which I hope will be a lot of people coming into the hobby in the next few years, it's going to be so easy conceptually. I get to cast 4 first level spells, I get to prepare 4 first level spells, and etc. all the way through the spell slots and the spell list.
And it does cut down on a little bit of the variety that you had in 5th edition, where, as a 5th level caster who just gained access to 3rd level spells, you could prepare 4 different 3rd level spells, just so you had tons of options for what to use those new spell slots on when the time came. And you can kind of figure out, in these encounters, I'm more likely to use these spells, or maybe I'm more likely to use those, or you could try something new while still having your fallback plan prepared. And it's a little bit more limiting. I mean, granted, you're still a prepared spellcaster. You can still prepare the other ones the next day. But having more options for what to do with the new toys you just unlocked is more powerful, but also just kind of more fun. That being said, I like...
Simple, Steven. Simple.
Yeah. And I know that one of the big design imperatives for One D&D is to simplify, and it is to make it more user-friendly and more new player accessible. And this does all of that. I'm always bitter when we lose something that we had. So it just needed to be said, but it's fine, and it is very consistent with how they're handling things across the board for all prepared casters.
Yeah, and I get that perspective, and I don't disagree.
But it is nice to have it be this simple and to have you only look in one place and everything about your spellcasting progression.
It is elegant, and the only reason I think that anyone would have a problem with this is if they played 5e and were used to it being different, right? Like if you'd never had anything to compare this to, you would think this was so great. Okay. Moving on from that, there is one more thing gained by Druids at 1st level, and that is something new called Channel Nature. This is conceptually symmetrical to the Cleric's Channel Divinity and the Paladin's Channel Divinity. The conceit is that Druids are channeling divine power or natural energies to be able to achieve certain unusual effects. One of which, and the only one that is accessible at 1st level, is the iconic Wild Shape feature.
Even people who haven't played Druids in 5th edition probably know what Wild Shape is. It's the Druid's iconic ability to shapeshift into a beast. This was a huge part of their kit in 5th edition, And One D&D is just doubling down on Wild Shape. Almost all of the Druids features that we're going to be discussing moving forward are going to be circling back around to Wild Shape. For that reason, I suggested that it might be easier just to cover those all at once. So we're not going to be digging into this right now. Just understand that at first level, you gain access to this feature. It's an option for your channel nature, and you get to do channel nature 2 times per long rest and regain a use every short rest. Notably, this is slightly less than you used to have in 5th edition, because in 5th edition you did get 2 per short rest, but it will catch up eventually.
It's also worth noting that you're getting access to channel nature and thereby Wild Shape a level sooner. You're going to start the game with it, which is pretty neat. And that the channel nature ability is not limited to Wild Shape. You are going to be unlocking more and very different ways to use this class feature as we continue through the rest of the class.
As a matter of fact, 2 more options are unlocked immediately upon reaching 2nd level.
Real quick before we move on to level 2, let's quickly cover the similarity/change to channel nature and channel divinity, because they are changing retroactively the way that the cleric's channel divinity worked, and therefore the way that the paladins will, which we're going to be going over next episode, and how channel nature works for the druid. I was actually excited by how your channel divinity uses were tied to your proficiency bonus in the previous playtest document, because I liked the ability that it grew over time, that it got up to such a nice number and when you reached higher levels, and you were rewarded with sticking to the class.
Right.
However, it was pointed out by people who multi-class more than me that since it was tied to your character's proficiency bonus, it was going to go up whether or not you invested in the class, and that was a bit of a problem.
I am surprised at myself and disappointed that I did not think of this exploit first. Things that scale according to your proficiency bonus don't care whether or not you stick with the same class or not. As soon as you unlock a feature that scales with your proficiency bonus, you could then take levels in another class for the rest of your adventuring career, and your uses of that resource would only continue to increase. And so the way that they've set it up in this playtest packet and retroactively applied to the cleric is that it does scale with your proficiency bonus. However, it caps at level 9 when you reach proficiency bonus 4. It will no longer continue to grow after that.
Which is an odd compromise in my mind. Like we're saying, we're not tying it to the proficiency bonus, but it's still going to match your proficiency bonus all the way up to level 9, and then it's just going to stop. It's going to stop. It's not going to get any better than that. I wouldn't mind it if it continued, since we divorced it from the proficiency bonus, if it continued to increase after level 9. In fact, I argue maybe it should. But they decided to stop it there. 4 uses max, level 9, you cap it out.
Yeah, I don't know that an extra 2 uses a day would have really made a big difference. 4 plus 1 per short rest is already a pretty significant number. There probably aren't that many druids out there, not that many campaigns that are actually using it more than that anyway. So if they were going to cap it somewhere, I'm not really upset by where they chose to. It does kind of fly in the face of their previous design philosophy, but I can definitely see why they're doing it.
Well, especially as we're getting into seeing what all the druid can do with their channel nature. I don't think that there are a bunch of druids out there using that many wild shapes all the time, or if they were just doing it to prank or to show off, at least in my campaigns. But with the other things that channel nature is good for, with the things that channel nature is going to be able to do, maybe they wouldn't use them more than 4 times a day. But what's the harm in them having the power to do so? I don't know. We'll see. I just think that it's interesting that they decided this is going to stop getting better after 9th level. Seems like a weird cutoff point. But anyway, sorry for interrupting. You were saying about channel nature at level 2.
Oh, well, it's fine. Yeah, that's a good point because, you are going to be doing more than wild shaping with these channel nature uses, or at least they're going to try to convince you to do something other than wild shape with these channel nature features. Let's go ahead and cover the additional options unlocked at level 2. The second level feature for Druid is called Nature's Aid, and the entire thing is these 2 new uses for your channel nature. First off, we have Healing Blossoms. You can take a magic action and choose a point within 30 feet of yourself to create a 10-foot radius sphere that is filled with spectral flowers. And these spectral flowers are going to heal the creatures inside. To use it, you roll a number of d4s equal to your wisdom modifier, minimum of 1, which it's nice that they include that because there are some places where they don't. And you add the dice together, and then from the results of those dice, you create a pool that you can distribute however you want amongst creatures in that area. Now, notably, not all the creatures in that area are healed for this amount. The distribution is as you see fit. I guess similar to, what is that spell? Is it Mass Heal that does that?
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking. I was kind of thinking of it as a AoE lay on hands.
Right, because that's the other one that you have a pool for, yeah.
Because I think in low levels. Clearly you think in high levels.
Plus, you kind of have that on the mind because we're in the same playtest packet that has the Paladin.
So yeah, you establish this pool of healing power, and then you're able to divvy it up and restore hit points to any creature in the area that's missing them. Importantly, that spot that you choose doesn't have to be on the ground. It is a sphere. It extends to the air. If you have low-flying fruit or allies that are in the air, you are able to make that happen for them, and I think that's pretty neat. I am interested that they went with spectral flowers and not ghost blossoms or ecto-irises. Just a little bit of flavor there I think would have been really fun, but they chose to go like really, really boring with it.
Ghost flowers.
But this is a pretty neat little ability with a class feature, not with a spell slot. They are emphasizing the Druid's healing potential. And as a part of the priest group, which the UA defines as being emphasized on healing, defense, and utility, this is moving the Druid from, again, away from being the AC tank, away from being the HP tank, and moving it into a more functional support role that it was formerly having to burn spell slots to be able to do. This AoE healing potential is a pretty new, bold step for the Druid. Is it better than Wild Shape? We'll have to see when we get there, but I like that it's an option. There will be opportunities where this will be used to great effect.
And I don't want people to get the wrong idea. You should know that this Healing Blossom is not usable like during a Wild Shape, but this is an option that you have in addition to Wild Shape. It's kind of an either or, at least for now. I actually really like this Healing Blossoms feature. I think that I would be pretty excited to use it as a level 2 Druid. What I wouldn't be excited to do is to use this as a, say, level 10 Druid. Because as awesome as this feature is, it does not improve at any point during your Druidic progression. Whereas the Wild Shape is going to improve significantly as you level. I guess I would have just liked to have seen this like scale up a little bit, like a cantrip or any of the class features that say, hey, once you reach 5th level, you get an extra D4 or something like that. I really would have liked to have seen this still be relevant your entire progression, other than just a slightly shorter range healing word.
Well, you say that. I think they do have the answer to that as we go forward, and we'll address it when we get there. But you're kind of right that it seems like it's not going to be useful on the surface as it's presented here. The only thing it scales off of is your wisdom modifier, which is going to cap out at a 5, and it's going to take you probably at least to level 8 to get there.
Right, which means that when you get to that highest wisdom modifier, you have
maximum potential.
That's going to be 5 D4s that you get to roll, which is going to be, an average of, I want to say 15 hit points that you get to restore?
Yeah, somewhere between 4 and 20.
I was thinking that it was going to be an average of 10, just because math. But I got to remember that dice are always weighted slightly in favor. The average of a D4 is 3. So I guess having an average roll of 15 is actually pretty good. When I thought the average roll was 10, I was kind of not excited about it at all. Anyway, I think the problem stands. I think that it is going to be hard to incentivize someone to use this feature as opposed to all the other cool things you can do with the channel nature.
All right, I hear you, and I'm going to let you finish, but let's revisit this when we get to level 15.
Speaking of the other things that you can do with channel nature, let's talk about Wild Companion, the other option that you get here at level 2.
Okay, this one's weird. But I know the kind of people that want to play Druid are probably really excited about this, but I don't really super get it. So as an action, a magic action, and a single action, you can use Channel Nature instead of a spell slot to cast the Find Familiar spell. Usually that is a 10-minute casting time to bring a furry little critter to your side. You can do it as an action. One turn, bam, you have a little furry friend. When you do this, the creature summoned is a fae, and it's temporary. It goes away when you finish a long rest. And we are going to see that the Find Familiar spell is different in this UA as opposed to in previous versions of the game, which is going to make it slightly more appealing. But this, even with the issues that you were pointing out with Healing Blossoms, this is the one I'm probably not using.
But Rob, Find Familiar is such a good spell. Or at least it was in 5th edition.
And it's worth saying that you may remember this feature being featured in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and maybe that's why people are really excited about it. If it tested well there, that's probably why it's come over here and is showing up as a channel nature feature.
Yeah, the animal person is going to play a class that gets to turn into animals, and they also get to have animals. I mean, it seems very on brand, at least from a consumer's perspective. Because now all of the dog people and the cat people can be cats and have cats and just be very happy about that.
So in order to determine how we really feel about this, we need to get into the Find Familiar spell. Skip down to page 18 if you're following along on the PDF and see that initially it's looking fairly similar. Did I say that it takes 10 minutes before? I lied. It takes an hour. Really long time to find one of these guys for yourself.
Yeah, an hour. Ritual spells, man. One of the longer ritual spells, too.
The reason I was thinking the number 10, I suppose, was because it costs 10 gold in materials to summon yourself a familiar. Guess what? Druids, you have a class feature that saves you 10 gold. Congratulations. You don't have to spend that anymore. It also saves you an hour, and time is money. Now when you cast the spell, instead of choosing from a particular creature from a very short list of options, you are just going to be able to summon an otherworldly familiar, which is a new and freshly provided stat block in the confines of the spell that is going to cover your bases. You're going to choose your particular flavor of otherworldly familiar and whether they are suited more to land, water, or air environments, basically how you want them to get around and where you want them to be comfortable, with some slight changes to the stat block, depending on which one you choose.
A couple of changes that they've made to the familiars that you can summon using the spell. For one, they no longer get their own turn in initiative. They now share your initiative count and take their turn immediately following yours. They still obey your commands, which doesn't require any action on your part, unless you want them to attack, which is a thing they can do now.
What?
Yes, indeed. If you do want them to attack, then you need to use your reaction when it is their turn in order to make them do so. And of course, as usual, if you don't issue any commands, they're going to dodge and move away from any danger that they might face. And if you want to get rid of your familiar, you can dismiss them as a bonus action, which is faster than it used to be. It used to cost an action to do so.
I'm seeing a lot, just from reading this material and the previous ones, bonus actions are getting a lot more love, which is surprising considering how different members of the design team felt about them in 5th edition and went on record as saying so. But they're becoming more useful. You're getting more options basically across every class for what to do with them.
They are becoming almost as hotly contested as a regular action. But I know that people associate their action as the main thing that they do on their turn because they usually use that to attack or cast a spell. And I know that in these interviews between Kenrick and Crawford, they consistently say, when referring to saving someone their action, that they are keeping them from feeling like they're wasting their turn. And I would be lying if I said I didn't feel that way sometimes when I had to, say, dash or use my action to remove some sort of debilitating condition. So I understand that they're moving so much stuff to the bonus action so that you can do that and attack, but that is making the bonus action highly competitive.
Right. They're moving so much stuff off the action that now the action is free and clear and you probably know what you're doing with your action every turn. Now the bonus action is where the thought's going to have to go.
The bonus action's where the action's at.
But by the way, before we go any further, let me just say, it is so much nicer the way that they have laid out spells and their different effects in 1D&D. The Find Familiar spell in 5e is just a wall of paragraphs, and it's kind of hard to find anything in particular. It's so nice to be able to have that bold header over every paragraph in this version. So as we go down, you can still use your familiar senses This time, the range has been removed. You can see through the eyes and hear through the ears of your familiar with unlimited range. And the telepathy that the two of you can share and communicate with one another, that has been extended to 120 feet, so a little farther than the previous 100. Good to have those things. But one of the big bits of news is that using higher level spell slots to summon your familiar now actually has merits. Using the otherworldly familiar stat block, there are aspects that can improve if you are using a higher level spell slot to cast the spell. Now, this doesn't really work for our channel nature as it pertains to the Druid, but there is opportunity there.
That's right. You heard it here first, unless you heard it before this somewhere else.
That's dumb. That's really dumb.
Find Familiar is upcastable now. And you're going to get extra little benefits when you do upcast it. This is important for Druids because Druids get a free casting if they use their channel nature to do so. And by using that channel nature, they're not expending a spell slot, meaning that they can cast it at the highest level possible for them. At least that's how I and some other people are currently interpreting it. If you're getting to cast it without spending a spell slot, why would you cast it at the lowest possible level? Personally, I would do it at the highest possible level.
My assumption was that you would cast it at its base level, kind of like when you have a scroll or other magic item that allows you to cast a spell. But now that this is a spell that can be upcast, that is a question, and something that they really ought to specify before either people like me underutilize it or people like you overutilize it.
Time may prove me wrong, but my appreciation of the wild companion channel nature option is going to differ heavily based upon the answer to that assumption.
Hey everyone, Future Rob here. Popping in to let you know that after the episode we were able to go out on the internet and reference some rules, D&D's website, and the Sage Advice forums. And we can say now that anytime a class feature or a magic item allows you to cast a spell and it does not specify the level at which you are able to cast that spell, it is cast at the lowest possible level. So, unfortunately for Steve and unfortunately for Druids, the castings granted by this class feature will be at the lowest possible level. Okay, right back to it.
Let's talk a little bit about what these little suckers can do, why don't we? Their armor class is 10, plus 2 if they're the land variety, plus 1 per spell level.
Already benefits from casting it at a higher level.
And that bears true with the hit points as well, because their hit points are going to be 2 plus 2 per level of the spell. Moving on to speed, this is another place where the type of familiar you have chosen is going to be important, because they're all going to have a base speed of 30 feet, but the land variety will have a climb speed of 30 feet, the air will have a fly speed of 30 feet, and the water will have a swim speed of 30 feet. Just like you'd expect. Makes sense, right? Swim things swim, fly things fly. We're all on board with that, right? Okay, good, great, moving on.
Yeah, the environment that you are choosing for the summoning is going to affect its utility. And you're probably going to find yourself summoning a different familiar every time based on where you are and what you're trying to accomplish. Find Familiar was always a utility spell, but they're really going to be more useful in terms of exploration, thanks to this new movement type and tailoring the familiar that you summon to the environment that you are in. As you get into the different ability scores for the creature, it is a standard set. It is no longer different for each type of creature you summon. It is uniform, but going around through the previous options presented in 5e for this spell, this is pretty standard, kind of a kind average of the different ability scores that you saw across bats and frogs and rats and the like, with just a little bit of extra wisdom thrown on top of there above the average.
An additional little perk that is shared across the board, regardless of which type you choose, is that they will all have dark vision of 60 feet. They'll all have a passive perception of 12. And finally, they will all share a proficiency bonus that is equal to your proficiency bonus.
Which that's nice. You know, you summon this familiar, your talent as a summoner is now being taken into account.
If and only if you choose the water option, they will be amphibious, capable of breathing air or water. They do get 3 additional features, one of which is simply the ability to attack, which is new for familiars.
And that attack sucks. It is not good. It is 1 damage plus the spell's level. in one of 3 various damage types. Since you're not likely to be really pumping your high-level spells into this thing, it's not going to be a lot of damage, and it's costing you your reaction to be able to have it attack. I guess if you don't have anything better to do with your action this turn, you might take this option and do just a little bit more damage, but it's never going to be much. This is not what the Familiar is designed to do, but I do concede it needed something. It needs the ability to attack.
Agreed. And, it would be kind of weird if the Familiar, was really good at attacking, right? So I think this is fairly consistent. And, if you do get to cast your Find Familiar using that Druid feature at the highest possible level, it's still not going to be great, but it won't be entirely insignificant. Now, here's something neat about the Familiar-caster relationship. If the caster uses its reaction, it can command the Familiar to make an attack. However, the Familiar also has a reaction which it can use to deliver a spell which its master has cast. It can do this as long as it is within 120 feet of its master, and the caster can effectively cast its spell from the Familiar's location.
This is not necessarily new, because Found Familiars could do the same sort of thing for spellcasters in 5e. It just didn't require their reaction, but now that they're getting their own dedicated stat blocks, now that they're being, if you'll pardon me, being taken a little more seriously as a creature and as a factor in the combat, the fact that their action economy is being taken into account is good. That is an appropriate thing. And having that relationship defined is good. And I do kind of like the symmetry of caster and familiar using their actions and reactions to help the other achieve what they hope to do.
Now, before those of you out there get real excited, I should qualify that just like in 5th edition, the spell that the familiar can cast must be one that has a range of touch. No one's going to be extending the range of their fireball by an additional 120 feet thanks to the Find Familiar spell.
Finally, one of the new things that the familiars can do is kind of save themselves. Once per long rest, when a familiar is around and it would be reduced to 0 hit points, it pops into a pocket dimension for a while. And it stays there until you either call it back or until the timer runs out. So the money that you invested in casting the spell, assuming you're not a druid who uses their channel nature feature to be able to do it, and the relationship that you have forged with your Fey pet is preserved. It doesn't necessarily die when it reduces your hit points. Just a nice little concession for the people who really want to have a fantasy pet.
No more having your cat get kicked and just disappearing for good.
Yep, poor Frumpkin.
Frumpkin, that was his name.
Okay, so that is the Find Familiar spell as it exists in 1D&D, and that is what you are able to do without going through the usually associated rigmarole by using Channel Nature as a druid. That was a long second level.
Oh my God, it was. Man, I was the one who suggested that we go ahead and tackle Find Familiar so that people would know what they're actually getting with that feature. But Find Familiar is a pretty big spell in terms of how much text there is to go through and all the implications thereof. I don't regret my decision, but I am tired now.
So let's move on to 3rd level for the Druid. Here is where we are seeing the Druid subclass. Druids normally picked their circle a little sooner than this in 5th edition at 2nd level. But we are standardizing when these archetypes, when these masteries, these traditions, when all of this comes online, and it is going at 3rd level in 1D&D. We have been presented with the Circle of the Moon, one of the circles presented in the Player's Handbook in 5th edition, a very familiar and iconic subclass for the Druid. And because the Circle of the Moon is so focused on wild shape and improving that and giving you extra options, we're generally going to be glazing over those things, and we'll be coming back to them when we're ready to tackle the topic of wild shape.
As they give you these example subclasses in the playtest material, they're usually going for the roguiest rogue or the bardiest bard.
Oh my God, so bardy.
I don't know whether or not most people would consider the Circle of the Moon to be the druidiest druid, but especially when you take into account wild shape is a very iconic feature in 5th edition, and it is the linchpin feature for the druid in 1D&D. It is absolutely the one that doubles down on that the most. So because all but one of the Circle of the Moon's features directly tie into your use of Channel Nature to activate Wild Shape, we're just going to table that for now. Don't worry, we'll come back.
So, for now, let's just satisfy ourselves with saying that 3rd level gets you the subclass and 2nd level spells. Let's move on to 4.
Ah, yes, one of my favorite levels, because 4th level gets you a feat. It works exactly how it used to in 5th edition, and it is completely unchanged from the 4th level of every other playtest character that we've covered on this podcast so far.
Then let's go on to 5th level. 5th level, as always, is bringing us 3rd level spells. It's bringing us a +3 proficiency bonus, and therefore it is being matched by a 3rd use of our channel nature feature.
And we also get our 3rd cantrip. I don't know, I just always like mentioning whenever we get cantrips because it doesn't go up very much. Like, it's one of the slowest scaling facets of a spellcasting character. A druid's only ever going to get 4 throughout their progression all the way up to 20th level, but it finally ticks up from 2 to 3 here at 5th level.
Thank goodness we prepare them and we can get our jollies in, swapping those out as often as we need to, because that is just so limiting. But 5th level comes with more than just that. It comes with Might of the Land, a new feature that allows us to do something with our wild shape. So, coming back to it.
We are going to say that so much this episode, but I really just want to be able to talk through Wild Shape from its entire progression in a single conversation. I think that's going to be the best way to tackle this. Hopefully I'm right, because we're not recording this again.
All right, so some of this for a little bit is going to get pretty quick. 6th level, subclass feature. It's Circle of the Moon. It's probably got something to do with Wild Shape.
It does indeed. 7th level, it's another basic Druid feature. It also has to do with Wild Shape.
From 7th to 8th, we get a feat. Multiples of 4. What do you want from us?
We might even be able to do this even faster. Okay, hold on. 9th level, a base Druid Wild Shape feature.
Proficiency bonus goes up. Our final use of Channel Nature, access to 5th level spells, and a Wild Shape improvement.
10th level, we get that 4th cantrip, and also we get another subclass feature, which all we have to look at is Circle of the Moon, so it's another Wild Shape thing. I don't know what to tell you.
11th level, Wild Shape thing, but 6th level spells. And 12th level, feat, baby.
Yeah, that's the only thing that changes. But I mean, really, it's a feat. What more could you ask for? 13th level is a brand new class feature that all druids will get access to, and it's a Wild Shape feature, so we'll tell you about it in a minute.
14th level is a subclass feature that is not directly tied to Wild Shape.
We can talk about it?
That said, it's nothing new. It is a familiar feature for Circle of the Moon Druids that also came in at 14th level. It is the 1,000 Forms feature. The way that they have expressed it is different because this is a new addition, but the function is the same. You can cast the spell Alter Self on yourself as much as you want for free.
You can do it at will, and it doesn't count against your number of spells that you have prepared. Alter Self is a pretty good spell, and honestly, I would be excited to be able to cast any spell, except for True Strike, completely at will. That being said, Alter Self is kind of there to change your appearance, which is good. Druids couldn't do that. And then maybe to gain some bestial aspects to yourself, things like the ability to breathe underwater or to give yourself claws, and druids can just do that so much better through the use of their Wild Shape feature. Now, Rob did note earlier in this episode that the limited uses of Channel Nature meant that you could Wild Shape less than you used to be able to in 5th edition, and for that reason, maybe the value of this subclass feature has gone up in my estimation. Because if I can't just turn into a shark whenever I want, then maybe being able to breathe underwater as a normal druid might come in handy a little bit more often.
And the change appearance aspect of Alter Self that would allow you to look different than you normally look could be useful for social encounters and infiltration scenarios.
The druid's one weakness.
Not just exploration or combat as the natural weapons would be. This is a pretty versatile spell, and even though it's only of 2nd level, it's a pretty good one to be able to have on tap. Arguably, if you were going to give me a second level spell to be able to cast as much as I want, and I was going for versatility, this would be up there.
It's not quite a Swiss Army knife that you can just pull out and get your way out of any situation, but it is very varied in its potential applications, and it's a spell that a creative player will get a lot of mileage out of. So, as the subclass's capstone feature, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah, so I like it.
It's not like game-breaking or world-changing, but it's good.
You know what? Good is as much as we can ask for some of these days.
Second level spell on tap, pretty all right.
All right. After 14th is 15th, because numbers work that way.
They do.
You get access to 8th level spells and more wild shape stuff. Then you move on to 16th level, where you get a feat. And that's it.
I mean, like I said, what more do you want? Feats are awesome. At 17th level, you get your maximum proficiency bonus at +6, and you get access to 9th level spells. In addition, you get another wild shape thing. Can you guys see why I was saying that One D&D really wanted to double down on this whole wild shape thing?
We are so close to being able to get my opinions on that, but let's hang on for a few more levels. Level 18, you get Archdruid. Archdruid is, first of all, just a really cool word. I want to be called an Archdruid. And I want my characters to be called the same. It allows you to regain a use of your channel nature, which can be used for one of 3 different effects, as we have seen, whenever you roll initiative. So you are never starting a combat without the ability to use your iconic class features. And it rolls in the ability to live longer than everybody else, basically. You only age 1 year for every 10 that your character lives. These 2 features are kind of smushing together the 5e capstone feature called Archdruid and the 5e 18th level feature Timeless Body, which was a crushing disappointment. Like, that was a terrible thing to unlock at 18th level. No one was excited to get that. Very cool roleplay stuff, but no mechanical benefit whatsoever.
Your character is going to get to live so long.
Like, so long, dude.
So much longer than this campaign is going to last. And why do you care if your character is going to live that much longer than you're actually going to be playing them? This only matters if you're, like, trying to create an NPC for the next campaign. And that's not even up to you. That's, like, up to the dungeon master.
It only matters if you're Keyleth and you're knowing that your sweetheart is going to die long before you do. And then they die prematurely anyway in the final fight. Spoilers.
The thing about this feature, because they're giving you the 18th level feature that you had in 5th edition here at 18th level, and they're stealing the name from the 20th level feature for the Druid from 5th edition. But the 20th level feature from 5th edition was one of the only capstones that I actually thought deserved to be there. A 20th level Archdruid in 5th edition could use their wild shape an unlimited number of times. They didn't get one extra use when combat rolled around. They could do it at will. In addition, just all the time, passively, an Archdruid could ignore verbal and somatic components of all their Druid spells and any material components that didn't have a cost and weren't consumed by the spell. Just all the time.
Including when they were in their wild shape, which we will see does make a comeback when we start getting into that feature, and sooner than it did in 5th edition. But nothing is going to quite match that unlimited number of wild shapes thing. We see bits and pieces of that, and we'll explain that as we go through the wild shape, but yeah, that was a really impressive part of the Druid. It was something that really made you want to go all the way with Druid and give up on multi-classing, because that, especially as powerful as wild shaping was and Druids were in 5th edition, you weren't getting anything new out of it by multi-classing. Like, that was just the pinnacle.
Well, even though they give you a taste of the 5th edition Archdruid feature in a upcoming One D&D feature, it is just categorically not as good. This ability to ignore components, even while in your regular Druid form, is not represented anywhere. By the way, that's important because it makes you uncounterspellable, regardless of the form that you're in. Basically subtle spell, just all the time.
All right, it's getting harder and harder to talk about these class features without actually going into wild shape, so let's quickly dust off 19th and 20th level. You don't get new spells, you don't get new proficiency bonus, all you're getting is a 19th level feat and a 20th level epic boon feat, which have been improved You're going to talk about them later because we still have a lot to go for Druids.
Yeah, one of the things that the design team for One D&D has been talking about is that they're getting a lot of feedback that 5th edition capstones were disappointing, and that a lot of the epic boons that they've given out in this playtest material is similarly disappointing. So they're working to respond to that feedback and to give us something that's going to be satisfactory for the characters that stick with their class that whole way, that survive all the way to the 20th level. They want there to be something to reach for waiting for you at the end. So in addition to the epic boon feats that we'll be talking about later on, because they have given us a few new ones in this playtest material, they are also adding an ability score increase. Now, this is different from the ability score increase feat that you've had an option to take every time that a feat has come up as you've progressed. This is in addition to the feat that you get as part of your epic boon. You will now increase an ability score by 2, and for the first time ever, this ability score increase can raise a score above 20, as long as it doesn't go over 30. Meaning that any time that we've talked about, or will talk about for the rest of this episode, a Druid's Wisdom modifier coming into play, the cap is no longer a +5. This will give you the ability to drop that 2 in Wisdom, which you probably will because it's the Druid's primary ability score, and make those abilities scale to a +6.
It's worth noting, and maybe this will give you something to look forward to as we cover it in a future episode, that the epic boons presented here are all reworks of the latest 3 epic boons presented in the Cleric UA, and they also include an ability score increase in the feat that can also push your ability scores beyond 20. So there is more potential there, but oh boy, I don't want to open up that can of worms while we still have so much wild shape to talk about. If you enjoyed this episode and wish to hear more like it, please consider supporting us on Patreon or on Anchor.fm. You can also support us by using code TWINS10, that's TWINS10, whenever buying dice or other premium Dungeons & Dragons products from MistyMountainGaming.com. Or just by sharing us with your friends. If you'd like to join the conversation, please join our community Discord, or reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Links to all of that below the episode. And hey, in case you don't hear it anywhere else this week, we love you guys. Till next time.
One of which is simply the ability to attack, which is new for familiars. Which is new for familiars.